Welcome to our Buy to Let webinar. I'm Megan from ESPC. I'm just going to be hosting today, guiding you through the webinar. Before we're going to kick off with an overview of the rental market with Nicky, who's just joined us. Then we're going to hear about the mortgage market, the Buy to Let mortgage market from Paul. And then, Tzana's going to chat us through the property market trends that we're seeing, and then we'll open the floor to some audience Q&As. We have had quite a few pre-submitted Q&As, but if you have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to leave them in the chat box and we'll get to them. So Nicky, I don't know if you want to kick us off and just kind of chat us through, first of all, the Scottish rental market in general.
Yeah, sure, no worries. Thank you very much. Thanks everybody for joining us today. So yeah, I'll just kind of give you a brief outline, I guess, of what's been happening in the rental market in the last kind of 6 or 7 months as we are now. So as always, it is pretty busy. We have seen rents increasing, maybe not as fast or as high as they have been previously, but still things are increasing, and kind of the time to let is still pretty quick. Again, it's been a little bit longer in the last couple of months, but it's still pretty quick compared to other areas kind of around about. The slide on the screen there will just give you an idea of kind of what's happening in terms of the average rent. So you can see their kind of average rents for a 1, 2, 3, 4 bedroom property, kind of what difference that we've seen year on year in the last 5 years, in the last 10 years, and what the kind of average time to let is. So that covers the kind of Scottish rental market as a whole. And I think, Megan, the next slide is a little bit more specific to Edinburgh. So you can see some figures are slightly different there. So the average rent is certainly much higher. One bedrooms have seen a really big increase year on year. They are now just over £1,000 a month. That's gone up 11% in the last year. The average time to let for a one bedroom is just 18 days, which is pretty quick. So yeah, there's lots of really positive things kind of around about those stats. I guess maybe just to talk about the market a little bit more, there were kind of significant changes earlier this year where we saw the rent cap was removed, meaning that landlords were able to increase their tenants' rents without it being capped. Landlords were able to propose whatever amount that they felt was appropriate, and if acceptable to the tenant, then that would just happen. If there were any issues with the tenants and the proposed amount, then what we do is encourage landlords just to have a chat about that, so that hopefully an agreement could be reached if they weren't happy with the original proposal. But if not, there was the option for tenants to refer to a rent officer when they would make an independent decision. But certainly in the experience that we've had, there's been very few very few tenants that have contested any rent increases. So most seem to be happy to go ahead. And we also saw the eviction ban that was lifted. So if you are now needing to evict a tenant, you can apply through the first tier tribunal. They will grant an eviction order if appropriate, and then that can be put into force. So whilst that can happen, it's not a particularly quick process, unfortunately, but it is there, and landlords are more supported than they had been when those bans were in place. We've also seen lots of landlords kind of selling. So that's mainly due to their own kind of changes in financial situations. Landlords are selling, putting their properties on the market. What that has left us with is a real gap in the market. So landlords are selling, tenants are still wanting to rent, but there's not enough properties to rent. So they're really struggling to secure something. So that's really where, if you're a new landlord or looking to invest, you can really kind of plug that gap in the market, because it's definitely there at the moment. And I think maybe there have been people have maybe raised concerns about kind of how the new Labour government is going to be affecting kind of what's going on in the private rental sector. But it is worthwhile to remember that, you know, Scotland is a devolved government. So what's happening down in Westminster isn't necessarily going to be directly affecting the Scottish private rental sector. I know people are concerned that, you know, landlords aren't going to have as many rights, but that's certainly not something that's going to be an automatic here. And then the new housing bill, so that's been submitted. There are lots of different potential solutions as to how things may or may not change, but that's a long process, and we're not really likely to see anything that they've put in there really kind of be put into effect until 27, 28. So, that's a little bit far in advance. But what I would say as a whole is if you're here and wanting to get information about the rental market and thinking about investing, it is a really good time to get into it. There's a real gap in the market. Properties are being absolutely snapped up. So my advice would be, if you're thinking about it, yeah, just do it.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Nikki.
Thank you.
I think that's really useful, and hopefully answer some questions. But if you've got any other questions from anything Nikki just said, as we said, pop them in the Q&A box. So Paul, we're just going to pass over to you. I don't know if you want to give us a bit of an update on mortgage news.
Yeah, sure. Just to give you an update on the buy-to-let mortgage market, in 2023, it declined very slightly, but it was only slightly. There are a number of reasons for that, which I'll come on to in a second. But despite this, the housing market, especially in Edinburgh, remains very resilient. In terms of the main reasons why it dropped a little bit is because we are finding that clients are having to find slightly higher deposits. Buy-to-let mortgages are based on a minimum of a 25% deposit of the purchase price or the valuation, whichever the lower. But what we're finding is because of higher interest rates, and I'll give you a sort of flavour of what they are just now. An investment buy-to-let property, if you're using a 25% deposit, over the average interest rate is about 5.4%, which is about 0.6% higher than a residential mortgage. And if you're looking at putting a deposit down of 40%, you can get a buy-to-let mortgage under 5%, which is pretty good. But that is obviously nowhere near as good as what it was 2.5 years ago, when we could get rates at like 2.5 to 3%. So the reason why the market shrunk slightly last year is because interest rates were higher, making the mortgage payment slightly higher, which means that the deposit levels had to be a little bit higher, not so much 25%, but more like sort of 30 to 35%. And obviously, not everyone has a 30 to 35% deposit, and that's the reason why the market shrunk slightly. In terms of what you need to do to obtain the actual deal itself, the mortgage deal itself, is that each kind of property is kind of judged on its own merit. So what I mean by that is, let's say, I'll give you a quick example of that. Let's say you buy a 1-bedroom property in Edinburgh for 200,000. Yes, in theory, you only need 50k deposit, which is 25%. However, the rental calculation is depends on the lender, but normally they use a formula to work out if the rent is enough to make that mortgage payment, and a little bit more as well. And if it's not, then that's when you have to find a slightly higher deposit. To be honest with you, I get asked this question all the time. The best thing to do in a situation like that is to always check with a mortgage broker. One of us here at ESPC, for example, if the rental will fit with the mortgage payments, and if it does, then you're good to go, good to make an offer on the property, depending on what deposit you've got, of course. Because what I would normally do in a situation like that is, if somebody contacted me and said, this one's 200,000, I'm going to pay 205 for it, I've got a 60k deposit, is that enough? I'll do the calculation. I'll go to Nicky to check what the potential rent would be on that property. I'll then also check with my surveyor friend, who will give me a kind of indication of what he thinks he will actually indicate what the rent would be on that property, because the rents that surveyors usually tell us are actually lower than what obviously Nicky, who's really good at what she does, obviously, can get you as an actual as a rental itself. That's usually a little bit higher. Then from there, I'll calculate if it's possible to get you a mortgage based on these facts. And if it is, go ahead. If it's not, well, obviously it's back to the drawing board, if that makes sense. Or at least I can tell you how much deposit you can put down to actually obtain that property. And that's really as much as I can really tell you at this stage. As I say, the buy-to-let mortgage market shrunk slightly, but as I say, that's only because interest rates are higher. I think you'll find, hopefully, fingers crossed, in the next couple of years, if rates do come down, then deposit rates, the amount you need as a deposit will drop again.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Paul. I think that's really useful. And I think, yeah, you explained that really well. So hopefully, again, if anyone's got any mortgage questions, leave them in the box below. You're going to get sick of me saying that. Yeah, so we'll pass over to Tzana now, just to kind of chat us through the whole property market in general. What are you seeing in terms of buying and selling and in terms of investment properties?
Yeah, of course. Hi, guys. What I would probably say is this, I feel like very comfortably that we've definitely returned back to a seasonality in the market. So we are back to being your kind of typical springtime buoyancy, being your March, April, Mays. Summertime is still a really good time for sales, but people are on holiday. So you do have a shift of focus. Time on market tends to be longer than what we would normally see as the ESPC average in your kind of popular springtime market. And it's really just because, you know, we list a property on the market and I'll have people call up to say, I'm ready to view, but I'm just boarding my flight to Ibiza. Can I come back and book it in a week? And we're thinking, why not tonight? Why not this weekend? And so a lot of times if we are looking at sales, summertime, your June, July, and August tend to just take a little bit longer because our buyers and our sellers are both away. You then come into your autumn markets, your Septembers, Octobers, where buyers are wanting on the market to be under offer and in their new home by the Christmas holidays. With usually what we see, especially in Edinburgh and the Lothians, where you see most of the investment in, you're usually in your flats, your city center, your flats, your good locations there. So those can be anywhere between 1 to 2 to 3 bedroom style flats. Obviously in certain locations where you're near to universities, where you can get the larger home, like the larger properties that can turn into HMOs. Those will be very specific in terms of when they become available. But I would say comfortably we are returning to a seasonality in the market, seeing those peaks and troughs there. Your 1 and 2 bedroom flats, we typically see a lot of activity happening 12 months out of the year because our type of sellers and our type of buyers aren't necessarily centered around the family school holidays or, you know, when we need to move and get everything organized there. So that's really been comforting to see, especially after we've come out of that really chaotic post-COVID life, that we're finally returning back into what it was pre-2020. So we are very comfortable there. I think one of the most frustrating parts that I find, and I know a lot of the estate agents and solicitors throughout the market are finding, are the chains. You always thought that the Scottish property market wasn't like it is in England and other areas around the world, that, you know, we're not entering into chains. And a chain is basically where somebody is submitting an offer that is subject to sale, or they cannot complete on their onward purchase until their sale completes, or there's something holding them back or chaining them to not being able to complete. And we're finding this really frustrating. And I know a lot of it is because people want to know what their next move is. As Nicky said, the rental market is competitive. There's a lack of stock. There's such a gap in that market. And when, you know, you're fighting as a homeowner and you're wanting to sell and then buy onwards, but you're not just saying, well, I need a stopgap here. Obviously with the short-term lets and that market shrinking a little bit, you don't necessarily have those kind of quick 1 to 2 week to even 2 to 3 month stopgaps there. You're having to almost take out a new lease and you're competing with the already, you know, I guess the lack of stock available for the regular long-term rental. So that's caused a lot of people in the market to come in to say, well, listen, I'll only want to list my property once I have my next offer secured. And I think what's very important about that is you guys as buy-to-let investors, you are considered a chain-free buyer, similar to a first-time buyer. And I think that puts you in such a strong position to come in when you're meeting these viewers and you're meeting these sellers at the viewings, or you're speaking to the estate agent or the solicitor during the viewings. Ask them, what's your next move? How are things going? Do you have your next move secured already? Well, great. I'm a buy-to-let investor. I've already secured my mortgage. I've got the decision agreement in principle with Paul at the ESPC. I've already spoken to Nicky at ESPC Lettings to discuss what my rental is going to be. I'm pretty much ready and secured, and all I need to do is get my offer agreed on the property. So I think what's really good is that this allows investors to come in and make good, sensible offers and puts them in a strong position to allow that bottom level of the chain to get moving so that the upper end of these chains can get moving. I'm in one at the moment, and I think we've established that we're about 11 properties deep in this chain. And I'm waiting for my first time buyer to come in there. I'm like, where are you? And it is just ongoing, and it's growing arms and legs. And it's hard to have the communication from the top of the chain to the bottom so that everybody knows the transparency there. So it really puts you guys in a strong competitive position as a buyer to come in. I would also love to point out, anytime you see properties, and I know a lot of buy-to-let investors are thinking, where can I pick up properties and actually do a good return on it? Sometimes you're looking at properties that need renovation. So there may be derelict properties or properties that need a full overhaul that you can come in to do a good investment onto it and a good refurb, and then flip that on the market and put it up for rent. The biggest struggle I find, and I'm sure Paul and Nicky are going to pick up on this as well, is when we have a property that we know you couldn't let that out just now, it would not be compliant, you would not be able to get a rental valuation. As Paul said, a surveyor has to come in when you're getting a mortgage on a buy-to-let property. They have to come in and do their own survey for the lender, and they have to set a rental value on it. When you have a property that's in such poor condition that either the rental figures won't stack up to what you're needing it to be, or you just wouldn't be habitable for rental purposes at all, you cannot get a mortgage on it. So a lot of times those are then reliant upon cash buyers who can come in, do that renovation, and then perhaps then that's the point you would go in and speak to Paul to say, okay, I'm now ready to remortgage. Let's put this back over there. Let's flip it, and let's give it over to Nicky that she can do her work and get that property let out at the best figures that we can do. So those are always some really good ones. And especially if you're new to the investment market or to the buy-to-let market, you just think, great, I've got a decision agreement in principle. I've got my deposit there. I'm ready to do a buy-to-let mortgage. Let's find a project. We've got the manpower, or we've got the knowledge to do a refurb, but it doesn't always work that way. So those are some good tips I've got.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Tzana. I think they're a really useful piece of advice. So we have had some questions come in from our pre-submitted questions, and we've had some come in live, so we'll try and go get these answered now. Nicky, unsurprisingly, there's quite a lot for you to answer, but there is a couple for Tzana and Paul as well, so we'll try and get through them all. Our first one was from Caroline and Nicky, and she's asking, can you request a 1-year lease only? On what basis, and how do you ensure that your tenant will move out after 12 months?
So the quick answer is no, unfortunately not. So the leases that we issue here in Scotland is a private residential tenancy, and it's not for any fixed period of time. So it'll have a date that the lease starts, but no end date and no fixed period of time. It will continue until either party gives notice. So if you were maybe only wanting to rent your property out for 12 months, it doesn't mean to say that you can't do that. You would just need to know that you had the correct timings to serve your tenant notice and the correct grounds. It would depend why you were wanting to serve notice, what was the reason for you wanting to take back the property. Some of the most common ones that are suitable to serve notice are on if you have been away and you're returning back to the property and you want to live in the property as your main residence, or you're wanting to sell the property. They're probably the most common ones. If your tenants have been in the property for more than 6 months, you need to give them 84 days notice that you want that property back. How can you make sure that they move out? Well, what I would say is, keep in communication with them, make sure that they have understood that you've served them notice and what the end date is expected to be. If when they are coming towards the end of that time and they're expressing concerns to you that maybe they haven't been able to find another property to rent, or they think that they're not going to be able to move out, then really that's when you need to be having those conversations with them. Do you need to give them an extra month, or are you actually going to be needing to apply for an eviction order? But I would say keeping communication going during the notice period so that everybody knows each other's position should mean that you don't get any nasty surprises when it comes to their end of tenancy.
Perfect. And yeah, another question that Caroline submitted was, is it true that the tenant also pays for council tax directly themselves?
Yeah, so in most instances, unless you have specifically stated that rent will include the utilities, then the tenant is responsible for council tax, utility bills, broadband, telephone, all of those things. That's the tenant's responsibility, and they would be paid in addition to the rent, yeah.
Perfect. And they're also asking if they were to ask ESPC Lettings to do the initial rental agreement only and not manage it, what would the fee be?
So ESPC letters, we offer different varies of service. So that's from just advertising your property to advertising it, doing the viewings, advertising it, doing the lease, or fully managed. So what I would say is if you were looking for a particular service, we would tailor it to your inquiries, the requirements. So the best thing would be to contact me directly, and then depending what you're looking for, we can work out a fee from there. But yeah, we can tailor our services to what might be required. So the best thing would probably just to drop me an email, and then I would be able to let you know what the fee is for that particular service that you are looking for.
Perfect. Thanks, Nikki. And one more, I've got a few other for you.
Okay.
How long can it take to remove a tenant who fails to pay rent?
So if you have a tenant and they have not been paying their rent, you can serve notice on them. They have to be 3 months in rent arrears before you can serve notice, and then you need to give them a month's notice. So you've got 4 months there where potentially you haven't received any rent, and then you are hoping that they do move out at the end of their tenancy. There can be instances where they don't, and then you're going to have to apply for an eviction order through the first tier tribunal, and that does take time. It can be anywhere up to 6 months, depending on the caseload or that they already have in place. And during that time, your tenant could potentially not be paying rent. Unfortunately, in my experience, it's pretty rare. And what I would say is the benefit of using a professional letting agent really pays dividends if you've got a difficult tenant. If you're trying to manage something yourself, and you maybe haven't got the time to focus entirely on managing your property, or maybe you've not been able to keep up to date with current legislation, you can sometimes find that tenants may take advantage of that. Whereas if you are using a professional letting agent, this is our job, this is what we're going to do, this is what we're going to make sure doesn't happen. So whilst it is a possibility, it's pretty rare. And I would say, using a professional limits that possibility.
Perfect. Thank you, Nikki. I'll give you a little rest now. We've had a mortgage question come in, Paul. I just wonder if you would be able to answer it. Somebody has sent in saying that they are a British citizen resident overseas. Can they get a mortgage to purchase a buy-to-let flat in Edinburgh? They already have a flat that's not mortgaged in Edinburgh. And the rent from that flat should cover the mortgage repayments on a second property. But their bank seems reluctant to lend the money because they are not a current resident in the UK.
Yeah, it's possible. It's difficult, but it is possible. It's classed as an international buy-to-let mortgage, and we have someone that does that especially for us, and we can refer that client onto that individual who does this. But it can be done. We have done them in the past, so the answer is yes. But it will be obviously assessed quite thoroughly, and the criteria for that somewhat stricter. But it's possible that can be done. Yes.
Perfect. That's a nice and straightforward answer that we can help with. Nicky, back to you. Sorry. What are the key differences between having a short-term tenant and a long-term tenant in terms of the registration, licensing, tax? Just if anyone's considering doing buy-to-let for less than a year, is it worth it?
So you can, even if you are if you're considering buy-to-let, you can do it for less than a year. As I say, you can give notice at any time from your tenant. So the difference is, I guess, between short lets and what we call long-term lets are if you're letting out your property and during the time that your tenant is living there, that's their home, then that would be considered a long-term let. If you are renting a property shorter term, meaning people that are staying in the property are there on holiday and it's not their home, then that would be a short-term let. So there are two very different licensing requirements between long-term and short-term. For short-term lets, you need to apply to the council. That may or may not grant you a license. It would mean a change of use from residential to commercial property. And Edinburgh is restricting the number of these licenses that they are issuing at the moment. So it is more difficult, but it doesn't mean to say it's impossible. You cannot advertise your property or let your property on a short-term basis without the license issued by the council. So it's not as though you can start the process, put in your application and think, great, when it comes through, that'll be fine. And in the meantime, be renting it out on a short term. So you can't do that. You need to wait until that's been granted. So the short term lets, as you can tell, the Edinburgh Council are trying to limit those. If you've been doing it for 10 or more years, then they're happy for you to continue, providing there's been no issues. But it's certainly much harder for people to get into that market. So we're seeing more and more landlords getting out of that and moving their properties to a more long-term option.
Perfect. Thanks, Nicky. We've had another question come in. Tzana, I think you'll definitely be able to help with the first part, and I'll open the second part of the question up because I'm not sure who'd be best placed to answer it. But this person is asking, where are the best locations to buy for students at Edinburgh Uni? And can we explain the part rent, part buy options available?
Oh, okay. In terms of investment for Edinburgh Uni, I think it's been interesting. Like first of all, our public transport with the expansion of the tram actually opened you up to a wider opportunity that you don't just need to be in what's typically seen as the south side of Edinburgh. And that would be, I guess, primarily where people would look to come in, or students, professionals, lecturers would look to come in if they're, based at Edinburgh University or the King's buildings or anything. They would usually look in terms of your postcodes of your EH9s or your EH10s. That would be like Newington, you're going into the Grange, you're going into Sheens. So even I would say you're actually extending probably a little bit over into Abbey Hill a little bit, because you're just right on the cusp over by the park. So you're kind of going into those areas. But we've got our LRT, our Lothian bus. They're fantastic. If you're a student, I think even if you're a uni student, you do get free bus passes. I would need to check that, but I do know, it is, the public transport system is fantastic. Very good in terms of bikes, cycling. So you kind of are open to a wider group and a wider audience, or excuse me, a wider area into where you can go into. Depending on other universities. So obviously you're looking at the Edinburgh Napier campus as well. And I think I saw the City Lets, their Q1 report for 2024, and I had already written down my kind of hotspots for investment in Edinburgh. And I had written down EH11 because you're massive and it covers a broad area. So you're kind of your Gorgies, Dalryes, your Polwarth, your Slateford, and that's actually and you're going into Sighthill as well. And that postcode has two of Edinburgh Napier's university campuses there. So you're near to Gorgie and Polwarth, and then you're over in Sighthill. And seeing the return on what you can get for investment there is phenomenal. I took actually two examples that we at Ralph Sayer have had, and it's just gone in the last couple of weeks. And one of them, I was doing the viewings for the client and had actually reached out to a couple of investors that I have on my buyers list to say, if you guys haven't seen this property, get in, because the rental return is fantastic. It was a 1-bedroom on Wardlaw Place. Home report was 155, so £155,000. And even as rightfully so, a seller will want, to get the best price for them. And even if a buyer, an investor buyer is paying a premium, so even if you're paying £5,000 over the home report value, purchase price at 160, the potential rental, even just me scanning the market, I'm not an expert like Nicky, but even if you're scanning the market, I was looking at some of them that weren't even in as good a condition as this property, 1-bedroom, and they were getting $975 per month. So your gross rental yield on this 1-bedroom flat in Gorgie for £160,000 purchase price would be 7.31%. That's a fantastic rental return. You're going then, still sticking in EH11, you're going into Sighthill. Again, you're near the Napier University, a 2-bedroom in Parkhead, Sighthill, same location. We had one that home report value at 180, and even if you're purchasing at 180, the potential rental return, I just saw one that wasn't even as nice as our client's property, was renting a 2-bedroom lower villa at $1,250 per month. So that's putting you at an 8.33% gross yield. Like, that is fantastic. And if you're going into your typical EH9s, your South Side, again, you've got your wide, varied choice. And I think you're probably going to see a lot of people who, as Nicky said, you're exiting out of the short-term let, and you were seeing a lot of people focusing on that EH9 postcode because of the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, which it's just about to start. We're so excited. I drove through town just a little bit ago and I was seeing all the posters, so I'm really looking forward to it. But that's when you were seeing a lot of people wanting to invest in that location to do a short-term rental to actually maximize on your kind of summer months there for the holiday lets. But even if you're looking at it from a family market, so you're wanting a property that's maybe like a 3-bedroom home, you're actually in a, or even if you have your home, as Nicky said, and you're moving abroad for a couple of years and you're wanting to let out your property, your schooling catchment areas in that location are fantastic. So you've got your James Gillespie's and your Boroughmuir, and the rental market there is super competitive for, you know, people to try and get into these school catchment locations. So that's always really good as well. And then again, you're going down into Granton. So you've got Edinburgh University there as well. That's your EH5. And what I love about this location is obviously earlier this year, Edinburgh Council had a consultation to extend the tram line from Newhaven down going in through to Granton up to the airport. And we'd always talked about where the hotspots for investment in Edinburgh. And it was Leaf in the Shore for the longest time, projecting that the tram was going to come through there and see this big boom. And it did. It opened up last June. And within a month, you were just seeing prices skyrocket. So I'm telling everybody now, I'm like, get into that EH5 postcode, because not only are you finding really affordable homes there, you're having the waterfront development that's happening. So that's going to see a big boom of builders and investors. But they're actually really affordable prices just now as well. So we've got one that we've just launched on the ESPC at Kingsborough Crescent, and there is one up for rent at the moment, and you're seeing that property is valued at 235. So even if a buyer, an investor, was to pay 240, again, saying paying a premium, the rental on that one, you can see a potential gross yield of 7%. That's really good in the Edinburgh market return. So I just think that, you know, definitely reach out to Nicky, ask her advice as well. And I think that that's really important, especially as a buy-to-let investor. You can always reach out to your letting agent to say, hey, Nicky, I'm looking to invest, because it's in her interest to get that new business on. You know, tell me about this property. Is this a good one? Is it not a good one? Do you have any advice? What should I be looking at if I'm going to do the viewings? And yeah, I would say those are your 3 kind of hotspots there.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Tzana. And then there was other part of the question, Paul, I don't know if you can maybe help with this, or Nicky, if you know anything about the part rent, part buy options for buy-to-let.
Not my area, I'm afraid.
No, that's fine. Okay, well, I'm sorry we couldn't help with that part of the question. We're just going to have a couple more questions that we've had come in live. So, Nicky, Sean has asked, what are the issues with EPC ratings and what are the changes that are ahead of us?
There are no issues. So no, for a long time, it has been a case where the Scottish Government was keen to put a minimum standard in place for rental properties in terms of EPCs. That has been pushed back and pushed back and pushed back, and still remains that case at the moment, so much so that a consultation is in place with the Scottish Government, which will in fact mean that there is no minimum rating required. And in fact, what you would have to do is meet a minimum standard, which is, you know, the property being insulated, there being light saving light bulbs, but so you would maybe have to meet these requirements, but not a minimum rating. And that's just basically because there are so many properties in Edinburgh and Scotland that making these changes would just be impossible. You know, some of the buildings, you know, listed buildings, you can't be making changes to windows and roofs. And so that's the same for obviously not only city centre properties, but more rural properties. So this is really across Scotland. So there are no requirements currently in place where a rental property needs to be displaying a minimum EPC rating. The changes that they're proposing, as I say, that it's going to be a list of requirements rather than a rating, is not likely to come into effect, if at all, until 2028. So as it stands, there are no minimum requirements for an EPC rating for a rental property.
Megan, do you mind if I ask Nikki a question?
Go ahead. Yeah, no problem.
During viewings, I typically am asked by investors or even first-time buyers, maybe if somebody's looking at a property, but it's more obviously we're specifically talking about investors. You will have pockets of properties or developments or even areas around Edinburgh where there isn't gas connected to the property and it is only electric heating.
Yes.
I've always been of the mindset, and I hope it's, you agree with it, that there's such a shortage of available stock on the rental market that tenants aren't necessarily as bothered with electric only versus gas and electric. And I guess is that what you're finding as well?
Yeah, so historically people have always been a bit, oh, this hasn't got gas central heating, that's not ideal. Whereas, yeah, things have changed in terms of the type of electrical heating that's available. It's much more efficient than it has been in the past. It's not as much of an issue for people. So if you were an investor and you thought, oh, it doesn't have gas, that's going to be a negative. Not at all. For a lot of tenants, they like just having one bill. They just have an electric bill.
Yes.
It's easy for them to budget. The gas kind of can, fluctuate. That can be a little bit difficult to manage for some people. But yeah, generally speaking, the electrical heating systems that are now, particularly in a lot of new build properties, they don't have gas and they have these much more efficient electric central heating systems. Then yeah, it's not anything to put off potential tenants as once it may have been. But yeah, I think they like just having one bill. It's quite nice.
I say that all the time
Yeah.
and they think, oh, I never thought about that. So
absolutely, yeah.
No, I think that was a great question, Tzana. Thanks for asking.
Thanks.
I've got one final question and then I'll let everybody go and enjoy the rest of their day. We've got a question from Graham and Nicky. Yeah, it's again for you, sorry.
That's okay. Get your money's worth.
What revisions to the proposed new Scottish Government tenancy bill would best help the buy-to-let private sector recover?
I mean, I really want to say I don't know. Is kind of the general. I don't know what people want, if they feel that the proposals in the housing bill are going to be sufficient. It's very much at the case where people are still being canvassed for their opinions. Just recently, I completed a poll that was sent through on what I thought of various proposals. A lot of what they are suggesting really concerns the social housing market and not the private residential sector. Notice that is protecting a lot of tenants within the social social housing. So I don't know at the moment that there's really enough in there. So we kind of just need to maybe not rely on that housing bill answering all of our questions, but for other legislation to maybe be put in place. As I said right at the very beginning, the new housing bill, any kind of proposals are not going to really appear until 27, 28 anyway. So we would maybe help, there's new legislation which is separate from the bill, which may encourage, relief in tax. Can that be a possibility? There are other things that, we could maybe be looking at lobbied before, is what I would say. So I don't think that the new housing bill is going to be the answer to the landlord's prayers, but I'm hoping that there will be measures that may happen before that will be.
Great. Well, thank you all so much. Just to go the right way in my slides. Just to finish up, Nicky, I thought we could do a little bit of a an overview of what you guys do at ESPC Lettings. If anyone's looking for a letting agent to manage their buy-to-let properties, what is it that you guys can do?
Yeah, so really right from the very beginning, as both Tzana and Paul have said, if you are right at the beginning of this kind of journey and you're looking at properties and you want to have an idea of where's the right place to buy, how much rent am I going to get, what kind of tenant is this going to attract, should I rent my property furnished or unfurnished, all of these questions, you're right at the beginning of the journey, then come and speak to me. We can have a chat. You can send me a link to something that you've seen. I can give you an idea, point you in the right direction. So we can start at that very first point, and then hopefully when you go on to purchase your property, once you've completed the sale, then we can help prepare it for the rental market. So that's making sure you and the property are compliant. We have a bank of contractors that we can use if you're needing any renovations, so we can make that property tip top for any potential tenants. We do the viewings, we do the references, we do the lease documents, and then we can manage the property for you once the tenants are in. So that's taking care of handling deposits, any maintenance. We are here 24/7. If there is any emergencies, we would do routine inspections. So you just literally sit back and get your rent each month, and we become the point of contact for your tenant. So that's really, really quick, from the very beginning to right to the very end. And then there are bits in between that we can help with if you need help on a certain bit but not the other. There are things that we can kind of tailor to anybody's requirements. But I would say, yeah, right from the very beginning, it's get in touch with us and we can point you in the right direction, and then get that relationship going and then help you all the way through to the end.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Nikki.
That was real whistle top. Sorry.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming to join us today. I hope that you all enjoyed that and had your questions answered. If you go away from today and think, oh my goodness, I wish I'd asked that or anything, we'll be sending out an email with the recording of this after this, and we'll include all the contact details of all of our speakers, so you can get in touch if you've got anything specific that you need to speak to somebody about. Otherwise, if you
Megan,
want to... Oh.
Sorry, could I ask, somebody has listed a question. It was something that I know we had talked about before, the furnished versus unfurnished, for Nikki for some advice. Yeah. Is there a difference in terms of desirability for furnished versus unfurnished on properties?
It really depends on the type of market that you're wanting to attract. Are you looking to rent to students or a family? What I would say is if you were renting a 1-bedroom flat to students, then you probably want to have it furnished. If it's a larger property that's going to be a family moving in, then unfurnished, because it's not going to be their first home. They're going to have their own furniture. The difference between what you can get for the rent on an unfurnished and a furnished property is virtually nothing. So there's, the rents are the same. The leases are the same. You have exactly the same rights to serve notice, to gain possession, whether your property is furnished or unfurnished. So what I would say is what works for you. I mean, if you happen to have a spare flat's worth of furniture, or you purchase a property that comes with the furniture, which happens quite often, then brilliant, do it furnished. That's probably still what most people are looking for. But if you don't, then unfurnished is, absolutely still going to get that property let for you.
Amazing. Thank you for spotting that, Tzana. I didn't see that last question coming.
I was like, I know I get asked that all the time during viewings. People will say what happens, or if we're doing a sale and a seller says, hey, listen, we would be open if somebody's looking at it for investment. Sorry, I have my dogs in the meeting room with me. Sorry if you hear them shaking. And people ask that all the time. And I think it's such a good answer.
Yeah, no, perfect. Thanks so much. So that's a wrap from us. If you want to find out anything more about ESPC, our letting service with Nikki, our mortgage advisors with Paul, please head to espc.com. You can find out a lot more there. Otherwise, we do events like this quite a lot. Also, when this webinar finishes, a little survey will pop up at the end. I'd really appreciate it if you could just leave your feedback if you've enjoyed it, if you think we should do anything differently. We would love to hear your feedback. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining us, and hope you have a lovely rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.